Welcome back to the Seven Dials Mystery by Agatha Christie. In the first part, we witnessed a practical joke gone wrong, a shocking death, and the first hints of a deeper conspiracy. But the mystery is far from over. In this next part, more clues will surface, suspicions will grow, and the web of intrigue will tighten. What secrets lie behind the Seven Dials? And who can truly be trusted? Let's continue the journey and uncover the next pieces of this thrilling puzzle. Very inconsiderate. That's what I call it, said Lord Caterham. He spoke in a gentle, plaintive voice and seemed pleased with the adjective he had found. Yes, distinctly inconsiderate. I often find these self-made men are inconsiderate. Very possibly that is why they amass such large fortunes. He looked mournfully out over his ancestral acres, of which he had today regained possession. His daughter, Lady Eileen Brent, known to her friends and society in general as Bundle, laughed. "You'll certainly never amass a large fortune," she observed dryly, "though you didn't do so badly out of old Coot, sticking him for this place. What was he like? Presentable." "One of those large men," said Lord Caterham, shuddering slightly, "with a red square face and iron gray hair. Powerful, you know, what they call a forceful personality. The kind of man you'd get if a steamroller were turned into a human being. Rather tiring," suggested Bundle sympathetically. "Frightfully tiring, full of all the most depressing virtues like sobriety and punctuality. I don't know which are the worst, powerful personalities or earnest politicians. I do so prefer the cheerful inefficient." "A cheerful inefficient wouldn't have been able to pay you the price you asked for this old mausoleum," Bundle reminded him. Lord Caterham winced. "I wish you wouldn't use that word, Bundle. We were just getting away from the subject." "I don't see why you're so frightfully sensitive about it," said Bundle. "After all, people must die somewhere." "They needn't die in my house," said Lord Caterham. "I don't see why not. Lots of people have. Masses of stuffy old great-grandfathers and grandmothers." "That's different," said Lord Caterham. "Naturally, I expect parents to die here. They don't count. But I do object to strangers, and I especially object to inquests. The thing will become a habit soon. This is the second. You remember all that fuss we had 4 years ago? For which, by the way, I hold George Lomax entirely to blame. And now you're blaming poor old Steamroller Coot. I'm sure he was quite as annoyed about it as anyone." "Very inconsiderate," said Lord Caterham obstinately. "People who are likely to do that sort of thing oughtn't to be asked to stay. And you may say what you like, Bundle, I don't like inquests. I never have, and I never shall." "Well, this wasn't the same sort of thing as the last one," said Bundle soothingly. "I mean, it wasn't a murder. It might have been, from the fuss that thickhead of an inspector made. He's never got over that business 4 years ago. He thinks every death that takes place here must necessarily be a case of foul play, fraught with grave political significance. You've no idea the fuss he made. I've been hearing about it from Treadwell. Tested everything imaginable for fingerprints. And of course, they only found the dead man's own. The clearest case imaginable. Though whether it was suicide or accident is another matter." "I met Jerry Wade once," said Bundle. "He was a friend of Bill's. You'd have liked him. Father, I never saw anyone more cheerfully inefficient than he was." "I don't like anyone who comes and dies in my house on purpose to annoy me," said Lord Caterham obstinately. "But I certainly can't imagine anyone murdering him," continued Bundle. "The idea is absurd." "Of course it is," said Lord Caterham, "or will be to anyone but an ass like Inspector Raglan." "I dare say looking for fingerprints made him feel important," said Bundle soothingly. "Anyway, they brought in death by misadventure, didn't they?" Lord Caterham acquiesced. "They had to show some consideration for the sister's feelings." "Was there a sister?" "I didn't know. Half-sister, I believe. She was much younger. Old Wade ran away with her mother. He was always doing that sort of thing. No woman appealed to him unless she belonged to another man." "I'm glad there's one bad habit you haven't got," said Bundle. "I've always led a very respectable, God-fearing life," said Lord Caterham. "It seems extraordinary, considering how little harm I do to anybody, that I can't be let alone. If only—" He stopped as Bundle made a sudden excursion through the window. MacDonald called Bundle in a clear, autocratic voice. The Emperor approached. Something that might possibly have been taken for a smile of welcome tried to express itself on his countenance, but the natural gloom of Gardeners dispelled it. "Your ladyship," said MacDonald. "How are you?" said Bundle. "I'm no very grand," said MacDonald. "I wanted to speak to you about the Bowling Green. It's shockingly overgrown. Put someone onto it, will you?" MacDonald shook his head dubiously. It would mean taking William from the lower border, milady. Damn the lower border, said Bundle. Let him start at once. And MacDonald, yes, milady. Let's have some of those grapes in from the far house. I know it's the wrong time to cut them because it always is, but I want them all the same. See, Bundle re-entered the library. Sorry, father, she said. I wanted to catch MacDonald. Were you speaking? As a matter of fact, I was, said Lord Caterham. But it doesn't matter. What were you saying to MacDonald? Trying to cure him of thinking he's God Almighty. But that's an impossible task. I expect the Coots have been bad for him. MacDonald wouldn't care one hoot, or even two hoots, for the largest steamroller that ever was. What's Lady Coot like? Lord Caterham considered the question. Very like my idea of Mrs. Siddons, he said at last. I should think she went in a lot for amateur theatricals. I gather she was very upset about the clock business. What clock business? Treadwell has just been telling me. It seems the house party had some joke on. They bought a lot of alarm clocks and hid them about this young Wade's room. And then, of course, the poor chap was dead, which made the whole thing rather beastly. Bundle nodded. Treadwell told me something else rather odd about the clocks, continued Lord Caterham, who was now quite enjoying himself. It seems that somebody collected them all and put them in a row on the mantelpiece after the poor fellow was dead. Well, why not? Said Bundle. I don't see why not myself, said Lord Caterham. But apparently there was some fuss about it. No one would own up to having done it, you see. All the servants were questioned and swore they hadn't touched the beastly things. In fact, it was rather a mystery. And then the coroner asked questions at the inquest, and you know how difficult it is to explain things to people of that class. Perfectly foul, agreed Bundle. Of course, said Lord Caterham. It's very difficult to get the hang of things afterwards. I didn't quite see the point of half the things Treadwell told me. By the way, Bundle, the fellow died in your room. Bundle made a grimace. Why need people die in my room? She asked with some indignation. That's just what I've been saying, said Lord Caterham in triumph. Inconsiderate. Everybody's damned inconsiderate nowadays. Not that I mind, said Bundle valiantly. Why should I? I should, said her father. I should mind very much. I should dream things. You know, spectral hands and clanking chains. Well, said Bundle, great Aunt Louisa died in your bed. I wonder you don't see her spook hovering over you. I do sometimes, said Lord Caterham, shuddering, especially after lobster. Well, thank heaven I'm not superstitious, declared Bundle. Yet that evening, as she sat in front of her bedroom fire, a slim, pajamaed figure, she found her thoughts reverting to that cheery, vacuous young man, Jerry Wade. Impossible to believe that anyone so full of the joy of living could deliberately have committed suicide. No, the other solution must be the right one. He had taken a sleeping draught and by a pure mistake had swallowed an overdose. That was possible. She did not fancy that Jerry Wade had been overburdened in an intellectual capacity. Her gaze shifted to the mantelpiece, and she began thinking about the story of the clocks. Her maid had been full of that, having just been primed by the second housemaid. She had added a detail which apparently Treadwell had not thought worth while retailing to Lord Caterham, but which had piqued Bundle's curiosity. 7 clocks had been neatly ranged on the mantelpiece. The last and remaining one had been found on the lawn outside, where it had obviously been thrown from the window. Bundle puzzled over that point now. It seemed such an extraordinarily purposeless thing to do. She could imagine that one of the maids might have tidied the clocks and then, frightened by the inquisition into the matter, have denied doing so. But surely no maid would have thrown a clock into the garden. Had Jerry Wade done so when its first sharp summons woke him? But no, that again was impossible. Bundle remembered hearing that his death must have taken place in the early hours of the morning, and he would have been in a comatose condition for some time before that. Bundle frowned. This business of the clocks was curious. She must get hold of Bill Eversley. He had been there, she knew. To think was to act with Bundle. She got up and went over to the writing desk. It was an inlaid affair with a lid that rolled back. Bundle sat down at it, pulled a sheet of notepaper towards her, and wrote. Dear Bill. She paused to pull out the lower part of the desk. It had stuck halfway, as she remembered it often did. Bundle tugged at it impatiently, but it did not move. She recalled that on a former occasion an envelope had been pushed back with it, and had jammed it for the time being. She took a thin paper knife and slipped it into the narrow crack. She was so far successful that a corner of white paper showed. Bundle caught hold of it and drew it out. It was the first sheet of a letter, somewhat crumpled. It was the date that first caught Bundle's eye. A big flourishing date that leaped out from the paper. Set 21st. September 21st, said Bundle slowly. Why, surely that was... She broke off. Yes, she was sure of it. The 22nd was the day Jerry Wade was found dead. This, then, was a letter he must have been writing on the very evening of the tragedy. Bundle smoothed it out and read it. It was unfinished. My darling Lorraine, I will be down on Wednesday. A.M. feeling awfully fit and rather pleased with myself all round. It will be heavenly to see you. Look here, do forget what I said about that 7 dials business. I thought it was going to be more or less of a joke, but it isn't. Anything but. I'm sorry I ever said anything about it. It's not the kind of business kids like you ought to be mixed up in. So forget about it, see? Something else I wanted to tell you. But I'm so sleepy, I can't keep my eyes open. Oh, about Lurcher. I think. Here the letter broke off. Bundle sat frowning. 7 dials. Where was that? Some rather slummy district of London, she fancied. The words 7 dials reminded her of something else, but for the moment she couldn't think of what. Instead, her attention fastened on 2 phrases. Am feeling awfully fit, and I'm so sleepy I can't keep my eyes open. That didn't fit in. That didn't fit in at all, for it was that very night that Jerry Wade had taken such a heavy dose of chloral that he never woke again. And if what he had written in that letter were true, why should he have taken it? Bundle shook her head. She looked round the room and gave a slight shiver. Supposing Jerry Wade were watching her now. In this room, he had died. She sat very still. The silence was unbroken save for the ticking of her little gold clock that sounded unnaturally loud and important. Bundle glanced towards the mantelpiece. A vivid picture rose before her mind's eye. The dead man lying on the bed and 7 clocks ticking on the mantelpiece, ticking loudly, ominously, ticking, ticking. Father, said Bundle, opening the door of Lord Caterham's special sanctum and putting her head in. I'm going up to town in the Hispano. I can't stand monotony down here any longer. We only got home yesterday, complained Lord Caterham. I know, it seems like 100 years. I'd forgotten how dull the country could be. I don't agree with you, said Lord Caterham. It's peaceful. That's what it is. Peaceful and extremely comfortable. I appreciate getting back to Treadwell more than I can tell you. That man studies my comfort in the most marvelous manner. Somebody came round only this morning to know if they could hold a tally for girl guides here. A rally, interrupted Bundle. Rally or tally, it's all the same. Some silly word meaning nothing whatever. But it would have put me in a very awkward position, having to refuse. In fact, I probably shouldn't have refused. But Treadwell got me out of it. I've forgotten what he said. Something damned ingenious which couldn't hurt anybody's feelings and which knocked the idea on the head absolutely. Being comfortable isn't enough for me, said Bundle. I want excitement. Lord Caterham shuddered. Didn't we have enough excitement 4 years ago? He demanded plaintively. I'm about ready for some more, said Bundle. Not that I expect I shall find any in town. But at any rate, I shan't dislocate my jaw with yawning. In my experience, said Lord Caterham, people who go about looking for trouble usually find it. He yawned. All the same, he added, I wouldn't mind running up to town myself. Well, come on, said Bundle. But be quick, because I'm in a hurry. Lord Caterham, who had begun to rise from his chair, paused. Did you say you were in a hurry? He asked suspiciously. In the devil of a hurry, said Bundle. That settles it, said Lord Caterham. I'm not coming. To be driven by you in the Hispano when you're in a hurry. No, it's not fair on any elderly man. I shall stay here. Please yourself, said Bundle, and withdrew. Treadwell took her place. The vicar, my lord, is most anxious to see you. Some unfortunate controversy having arisen about the status of the boys' brigade. Lord Caterham groaned. I rather fancied, my lord, that I had heard you mention at breakfast that you were strolling down to the village this morning to converse with the vicar on the subject. Did you tell him so? Asked Lord Caterham eagerly. I did, my lord. He departed, if I may say so, hot foot. I hope I did right, my lord. Of course you did, Treadwell. You're always right. You couldn't go wrong if you tried. Treadwell smiled benignly and withdrew. Bundle, meanwhile, was sounding the klaxon impatiently before the lodge gates, while a small child came hastening out with all speed from the lodge, admonishment from her mother following her. Make haste, Katie. That be her ladyship in a mortal hurry. as always. It was indeed characteristic of Bundle to be in a hurry, especially when driving a car. She had skill and nerve, and was a good driver. Had it been otherwise, her reckless pace would have ended in disaster more than once. It was a crisp October day, with a blue sky and a dazzling sun. The sharp tang of the air brought the blood to Bundle's cheeks and filled her with the zest of living. She had that morning sent Gerald Wade's unfinished letter to Lorraine Wade at Dean Priory, enclosing a few explanatory lines. The curious impression it had made upon her was somewhat dimmed in the daylight, yet it still struck her as needing explanation. She intended to get hold of Bill Eversley sometime and extract from him fuller details of the house party, which had ended so tragically. In the meantime, it was a lovely morning, and she felt particularly well, and the Hispano was running like a dream. Bundle pressed her foot down on the accelerator, and the Hispano responded at once. Mile after mile vanished. Traffic was few and far between, and Bundle had a clear stretch of road in front of her. And then, without any warning whatever, a man reeled out of the hedge and onto the road right in front of the car. To stop in time was out of the question. With all her might, Bundle wrenched at the steering wheel and swerved out to the right. The car was nearly in the ditch. Nearly, but not quite. It was a dangerous maneuver, but it succeeded. Bundle was almost certain that she had missed the man. She looked back and felt a sickening sensation in the middle of her anatomy. The car had not passed over the man, but nevertheless it must have struck him in passing. He was lying face downwards on the road, and he lay ominously still. Bundle jumped out and ran back. She had never yet run over anything more important than a stray hen. The fact that the accident was hardly her fault did not weigh with her at the minute. The man had seemed drunk, but drunk or not, she had killed him. She was quite sure she had killed him. Her heart beat sickeningly in great pounding thumps, sounding right up in her ears. She knelt down by the prone figure and turned him very gingerly over. He neither groaned nor moaned. He was young, she saw, rather a pleasant-faced young man, well-dressed and wearing a small toothbrush mustache. There was no external mark of injury that she could see, but she was quite positive that he was either dead or dying. His eyelids flickered and the eyes half opened. Piteous eyes, brown and suffering, like a dog's. He seemed to be struggling to speak. Bundle bent right over. Yes, she said. Yes. There was something he wanted to say. She could see that. Wanted to say badly. And she couldn't help him, couldn't do anything. At last the words came, a mere sighing breath. 7 dials tell? Yes, said Bundle again. It was a name he was trying to get out, trying with all his failing strength. Yes. Who am I to tell? Tell. Jimmy Thesiger. He got out at last. And then, suddenly, his head fell back and his body went limp. Bundle sat back on her heels, shivering from head to foot. She could never have imagined that anything so awful could have happened to her. He was dead, and she had killed him. She tried to pull herself together. What must she do now? A doctor. That was her first thought. It was possible, just possible, that the man might only be unconscious, not dead. Her instinct cried out against the possibility, but she forced herself to act upon it. Somehow or other, she must get him into the car and take him to the nearest doctor's. It was a deserted stretch of country road, and there was no one to help her. Bundle, for all her slimness, was strong. She had muscles of whipcord. She brought the Hispano as close as possible, and then, exerting all her strength, she dragged and pulled the inanimate figure into it. It was a horrid business, and one that made her set her teeth, but at last she managed it. There was no external mark of injury that she could see, but she was quite positive that he was either dead or dying. His eyelids flickered and the eyes half opened. Piteous eyes, brown and suffering, like a dog's. He seemed to be struggling to speak. Bundle bent right over. Yes, she said. Yes. There was something he wanted to say. She could see that. Wanted to say badly. And she couldn't help him, couldn't do anything. At last the words came, a mere sighing breath. 7 dials tell? Yes, said Bundle again. It was a name he was trying to get out, trying with all his failing strength. Yes. Who am I to tell? Tell. Jimmy Thesiger. He got out at last. And then, suddenly, his head fell back and his body went limp. Bundle sat back on her heels, shivering from head to foot. She could never have imagined that anything so awful could have happened to her. He was dead, and she had killed him. She tried to pull herself together. What must she do now? A doctor. That was her first thought. It was possible, just possible, that the man might only be unconscious, not dead. Her instinct cried out against the possibility, but she forced herself to act upon it. Somehow or other, she must get him into the car and take him to the nearest doctor's. It was a deserted stretch of country road, and there was no one to help her. Bundle, for all her slimness, was strong. She had muscles of whipcord. She brought the Hispano as close as possible, and then, exerting all her strength, she dragged and pulled the inanimate figure into it. It was a horrid business, and one that made her set her teeth, but at last she managed it. Then she jumped into the driver's seat and started off. A couple of miles brought her into a small town, and on inquiry, she was quickly directed to the doctor's house. Castle, a kindly, middle-aged man, was startled to come into his surgery and find a girl there who was evidently on the verge of collapse. Bundle spoke abruptly. I think I've killed a man. I ran over him. I brought him along in the car. He's outside now. I was driving too fast, I suppose. I've always driven too fast. The doctor cast a practiced glance over her. He stepped over to the shelf and poured something into a glass. He brought it over to her. Drink this down, he said, and you'll feel better. You've had a shock. Bundle drank obediently, and a tinge of color came into her pallid face. The doctor nodded approvingly. That's right. Now I want you to sit quietly here. I'll go out and attend to things. After I've made sure there's nothing to be done for the poor fellow, I'll come back and we'll talk about it. He was away some time. Bundle watched the clock on the mantelpiece. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes. Would he never come? Then the door opened and Dr. Castle reappeared. He looked different. Bundle noticed that at once, grimmer and at the same time more alert. There was something else in his manner that she did not quite understand, a suggestion of repressed excitement. Now then, young lady, he said, let's have this out. You ran over this man, you say. Tell me just how the accident happened. Bundle explained to the best of her ability. The doctor followed her narrative with keen attention. Just so, the car didn't pass over his body? No, in fact, I thought I'd missed him altogether. He was reeling, you say? Yes, I thought he was drunk, and he came from a hedge. There was a gate just there, I think. He must have come through the gate. The doctor nodded. Then he leaned back in his chair and removed his pince-nez. I've no doubt at all, he said, that you're a very reckless driver, and that you'll probably run over some poor fellow and do for him one of these days. But you haven't done it this time. But the car never touched him. This man was shot. Bundle stared at him, and very slowly the world, which for the last 3/4 of an hour had been upside down, shifted till it stood once more the right way up. It was quite 2 minutes before Bundle spoke, but when she did it was no longer the panic-stricken girl, but the real Bundle, cool, efficient, and logical. How could he be shot? She said. I don't know how he could, said the doctor dryly, but he was. He's got a rifle bullet in him, all right. He bled internally. That's why you didn't notice anything. Bundle nodded. The question is, the doctor continued, who shot him? You saw nobody about. Bundle shook her head. It's odd, said the doctor. If it was an accident, you'd expect the fellow who did it would come running to the rescue. Unless just possibly he didn't know what he'd done. There was no one about, said Bundle. On the road, that is. It seems to me, said the doctor, that the poor lad must have been running. The bullet got him just as he passed through the gate, and he came reeling onto the road in consequence. You didn't hear a shot. Bundle shook her head. But I probably shouldn't anyway, she said, with the noise of the car. Just so. He didn't say anything before he died. He muttered a few words. Nothing to throw light on the tragedy. No, he wanted something, I don't know what, told a friend of his. Oh, yes, and he mentioned 7 Dials. Said Dr. Castle. Not a likely neighborhood for one of his class. Perhaps his assailant came from there. Well, we needn't worry about that now. You can leave it in my hands. I'll notify the police. You must, of course, leave your name and address, as the police are sure to want to question you. In fact, perhaps you'd better come round to the police station with me now. They might say I ought to have detained you. They went together in Bundle's car. The police inspector was a slow-speaking man. He was somewhat overawed by Bundle's name and address when she gave it to him, and he took down her statement with great care. Lads, he said, that's what it is. Lads practicing. Cruel stupid, them young varmints are. Always loosing off at birds with no consideration for anyone, as may be the other side of a hedge. The doctor thought it a most unlikely solution, but he realized that the case would soon be in abler hands, and it did not seem worthwhile to make objections. Name of deceased? Asked the sergeant, moistening his pencil. He had a card case on him. He appears to have been a Mr. Ronald Devereux. with an address in the Albany. Bundle frowned. The name Ronald Devereux awoke some chord of remembrance. She was sure she had heard it before. It was not until she was halfway back to Chimneys in the car that it came to her. Of course. Ronnie Devereux, Bill's friend in the Foreign Office. He and Bill and, yes, Gerald Wade. As this last realization came to her, Bundle nearly went into the hedge. First Gerald Wade, then Ronnie Devereux. Jerry Wade's death might have been natural, the result of carelessness, but Ronnie Devereux's surely bore a more sinister interpretation. And then Bundle remembered something else. 7 dials. When the dying man had said it, it had seemed vaguely familiar. Now she knew why. Gerald Wade had mentioned 7 dials in that last letter of his written to his sister on the night before his death. And that again connected up with something else that escaped her. Thinking all these things over, Bundle had slowed down to such a sober pace that nobody would have recognized her. She drove the car round to the garage and went in search of her father. Lord Caterham was happily reading a catalog of a forthcoming sale of rare editions and was immeasurably astonished to see Bundle. "Even you," he said, "can't have been to London and back in this time." "I haven't been to London," said Bundle. "I ran over a man." "What?" "Only I didn't really. He was shot." "How could he have been?" "I don't know how he could have been, but he was." "But why did you shoot him?" "I didn't shoot him." "You shouldn't shoot people," said Lord Caterham in a tone of mild remonstrance. "You shouldn't really. I dare say some of them richly deserve it. But all the same, it will lead to trouble. I tell you I didn't shoot him." "Well, who did?" "Nobody knows," said Bundle. "Nonsense," said Lord Caterham. "A man can't be shot and run over without anyone having done it." "He wasn't run over," said Bundle. "I thought you said he was." "I said I thought I had." "A tire burst, I suppose," said Lord Caterham. "That does sound like a shot. It says so in detective stories. You really are perfectly impossible, Father. You don't seem to have the brains of a rabbit." "Not at all," said Lord Caterham. "You come in with a wildly impossible tale about men being run over and shot, and I don't know what, and then you expect me to know all about it by magic." Bundle sighed wearily. "Just attend," she said. "I'll tell you all about it in words of 1 syllable." "There," she said when she had concluded. "Now have you got it?" "Of course. I understand perfectly now. I can make allowances for your being a little upset, my dear. I was not far wrong when I remarked to you, before starting out, that people looking for trouble usually found it. I am thankful," finished Lord Caterham with a slight shiver, "that I stayed quietly here." He picked up the catalog again. "Father, where is 7 dials?" "In the East End somewhere, I fancy. I have frequently observed buses going there. Or do I mean 7 Sisters? I have never been there myself, I'm thankful to say. Just as well, because I don't fancy it is the sort of spot I should like. And yet, curiously enough, I seem to have heard of it in some connection just lately. You don't know a Jimmy Thesiger, do you?" Lord Caterham was now engrossed in his catalog once more. He had made an effort to be intelligent on the subject of 7 dials. This time he made hardly any effort at all. "Thesiger," he murmured vaguely. "Thesiger, one of the Yorkshire Thesigers. That's what I'm asking you. Do attend, Father. This is important." Lord Caterham made a desperate effort to look intelligent without really having to give his mind to the matter. "There are some Yorkshire Thesigers," he said earnestly, "and unless I am mistaken, some Devonshire Thesigers also. Your great Aunt Selina married a Thesiger." "What good is that to me?" cried Bundle. Lord Caterham chuckled. "It was very little good to her, if I remember rightly." "You're impossible," said Bundle, rising. "I shall have to get hold of Bill." "Do, dear," said her father absently as he turned a page. "Certainly, by all means." "Quite so." Bundle rose to her feet with an impatient sigh. "I wish I could remember what that letter said," she murmured, more to herself than aloud. "I didn't read it very carefully. Something about a joke, that the 7 dials business wasn't a joke." Lord Caterham emerged suddenly from his catalog. "7 dials?" he said. "Of course. I've got it now." "Got what?" "I know why it sounded so familiar. George Lomax has been over. Treadwell failed for once and let him in. He was on his way up to town. It seems he's having some political party at the Abbey next week, and he got a warning letter." "What do you mean by a warning letter?" "Well, I don't really know. He didn't go into details. I gather it said, 'Beware,' and 'trouble is at hand,' and all those sort of things. But anyway, it was written from 7 dials. I distinctly remember his saying so. He was going up to town to consult Scotland Yard about it. You know George?" Bundle nodded. She was well acquainted with that public-spirited cabinet minister, George Lomax, His Majesty's permanent Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, who was shunned by many because of his inveterate habit of quoting from his public speeches in private. In allusion to his bulging eyeballs, he was known to many, Bill Eversley among others, as Cotters. "Tell me," she said, "was Cotters interested at all in Gerald Wade's death?" "Not that I ever heard of. He may have been, of course." Bundle said nothing for some minutes. She was busily engaged in trying to remember the exact wording of the letter she had sent on to Lorraine Wade. And at the same time, she was trying to picture the girl to whom it had been written. What sort of a girl was this to whom, apparently, Gerald Wade was so devoted? The more she thought over it, the more it seemed to her that it was an unusual letter for a brother to write. "Did you say the Wade girl was Jerry's half-sister?" she asked suddenly. "Well, of course, strictly speaking, I suppose she wasn't, his sister at all. But her name's Wade?" "Not really. She was an old Wade's child. As I was saying, he ran away with his second wife, who was married to a perfect blackguard. I suppose the courts gave the rascally husband the custody of the child, but he certainly didn't avail himself of the privilege. Old Wade got very fond of the child and insisted that she should be called by his name." "I see," said Bundle. "That explains it." "Explains what?" "Something that puzzled me about that letter. She's rather a pretty girl, I believe," said Lord Caterham. "Or so I've heard." Bundle went upstairs thoughtfully. She had several objects in view. First, she must find this Jimmy Thesiger. Bill, perhaps, would be helpful there. Ronnie Devereux had been a friend of Bill's. If Jimmy Thesiger was a friend of Ronnie's, the chances were that Bill would know him too. Then there was the girl, Lorraine Wade. It was possible that she could throw some light on the problem of Seven Dials. Evidently, Jerry Wade had said something to her about it. His anxiety that she should forget the fact had a sinister suggestion. Getting hold of Bill presented few difficulties. Bundle motored up to town on the following morning, this time without adventures on the way, and rang him up. Bill responded with alacrity and made various suggestions as to lunch, tea, dinner, and dancing, all of which suggestions Bundle turned down as made. "In a day or two, I'll come and frivol with you, Bill, but for the moment I'm up on business." "Oh," said Bill, "what a beastly bore." "It's not that kind," said Bundle. "It's anything but boring." "Bill, do you know anyone called Jimmy Thesiger?" "Of course. So do you?" "No, I don't," said Bundle. "Yes, you do. You must. Everyone knows old Jimmy." "Sorry," said Bundle. "Just for once I don't seem to be everyone." "Ah, but how can you not know Jimmy? A slightly stupid-looking chap, but really as brainy as me." "You don't say," exclaimed Bundle. "But then he must be a genius. This is irony, isn't it?" "More or less." "What does he do?" "What do you mean?" "I wonder if working with foreign relations forbids you to understand your own language." "Oh, got it. You want to know what his work is?" "He doesn't do anything. Why should he work if he doesn't need to?" "You mean he has more money than brains?" "Not all that much. I said he was smarter than he looked like." Bundle remained silent. This rich fellow didn't seem to be a good ally, and nonetheless his name had been on the lips of the dying man. Suddenly Bill spoke again. "Ronnie always thought him really smart. Ronnie Devereux, you know? Thesiger was his best friend." "Ronnie," Bundle stopped, doubtful. Bill, evidently, ignored the other's death. Then it occurred to her for the first time how strange it was that the morning papers hadn't commented the subject. There could be only one explanation. The police, for their own reasons, were keeping the case quiet. "It's been ages since I saw Ronnie," Bill went on. "Since that weekend at your house. You know, when poor Jerry Wade died." There was a pause. "Unpleasant story, by the way. I suppose you heard about it." "Listen, Bundle, still on the line?" "Of course. Well, you went so silent that I thought you rang off." "No, I was just thinking of something." Should she tell him about Ronnie's death? She decided not to. It wasn't the kind of news to break over the phone. Soon, she must have a meeting with Bill. In the meantime, Bill. "Hello, I might dine with you tomorrow night." "Good. And we'll dance afterwards. I got a lot to talk to you about. As a matter of fact, I've been rather hard hit. The foulest luck, well, tell me about it tomorrow," said Bundle, cutting him short rather unkindly. "In the meantime, what is Jimmy Thesiger's address?" "Jimmy Thesiger, that's what I said. He's got rooms in German Street." "Do I mean German Street or the other one?" "Bring that Class A brain to bear upon it." "Yes, German Street. Wait a bit, and I'll give you the number." There was a pause. "Are you there still?" "I'm always there." "Well, one never knows with these dash telephones. The number is 103. "Got it. 103. Thank you, Bill." "Yes, but I say, what do you want it for?" "You said you didn't know him." "I don't, but I shall in half an hour." "You're going round to his rooms?" "Quite right. Sherlock." "Yes, but I say, well, for one thing he won't be up." won't be up. I shouldn't think so. I mean, who would if they hadn't got to? Look at it that way. You've no idea what an effort it is for me to get here at 11 every morning, and the fuss Cotters makes if I'm behind time is simply appalling. You haven't the least idea, Bundle, what a dog's life this is. You shall tell me all about it tomorrow night, said Bundle hastily. She slammed down the receiver and took stock of the situation. First, she glanced at the clock. It was 5:20 to 12. Despite Bill's knowledge of his friend's habits, she inclined to the belief that Mr. Thesiger would by now be in a fit state to receive visitors. She took a taxi to 103 German Street. The door was opened by a perfect example of the retired gentleman's gentleman. His face, expressionless and polite, was such a face as may be found by the score in that particular district of London. Will you come this way, madam? He ushered her upstairs into an extremely comfortable sitting room containing leather-covered armchairs of immense dimensions. Sunk in one of those monstrosities was another girl, rather younger than Bundle. A small, fair girl, dressed in black. What name shall I say, madam? I won't give any name, said Bundle. I just want to see Mr. Thesiger on important business. The grave gentleman bowed and withdrew, shutting the door noiselessly behind him. There was a pause. It's a nice morning, said the fair girl timidly. It's an awfully nice morning, agreed Bundle. There was another pause. I'm motored up from the country this morning, said Bundle, plunging once more into speech. And I thought it was going to be one of those foul fogs. But it wasn't. No, said the other girl. It wasn't. And she added, I've come up from the country too. Bundle eyed her more attentively. She had been slightly annoyed at finding the other there. Bundle belonged to the energetic order of people who liked to get on with it, and she foresaw that the second visitor would have to be disposed of and got rid of before she could broach her own business. It was not a topic she could introduce before a stranger. Now, as she looked more closely, an extraordinary idea rose in her brain. Could it be? Yes, the girl was in deep mourning. Her black, silk-clad ankles showed that. It was a long shot, but Bundle was convinced that her idea was right. She drew a long breath. Look here, she said. Are you by any chance Lorraine Wade? Lorraine's eyes opened wide. Yes, I am. How clever of you to know. We've never met, have we? Bundle shook her head. I wrote to you yesterday, though. I'm Bundle Brent. It was so very kind of you to send me Jerry's letter, said Lorraine. I've written to thank you. I never expected to see you here. I'll tell you why I'm here, said Bundle. Did you know Ronnie Devereux? Lorraine nodded. He came over the day that Jerry, you know, and he's been to see me 2 or 3 times since. He was one of Jerry's greatest friends. I know. Well, he's dead. Lorraine's lips parted in surprise. Dead. But he always seems so fit. Bundle narrated the events of the preceding day as briefly as possible. A look of fear and horror came into Lorraine's face. Then it is true. It is true. What's true? What I've thought. What I've been thinking all these weeks. Jerry didn't die a natural death. He was killed. You've thought that, have you? Yes. Jerry would never have taken things to make him sleep. She gave the little ghost of a laugh. He slept much too well to need them. I always thought it queer. And he thought so too. I know he did. Who? Ronnie. And now this happens. Now he's killed too. She paused and then went on. That's what I came for today. That letter of Jerry's you sent me. As soon as I read it, I tried to get hold of Ronnie, but they said he was away. So I thought I'd come and see Jimmy. He was Ronnie's other great friend. I thought perhaps he'd tell me what I ought to do. You mean, Bundle paused? About 7 dials. Lorraine nodded. You see, she began. But at that moment, Jimmy Thesiger entered the room. We must at this point go back to some 20 minutes earlier, to a moment when Jimmy Thesiger, emerging from the mists of sleep, was conscious of a familiar voice speaking unfamiliar words. His sleep-ridden brain tried for a moment to cope with the situation, but failed. He yawned and rolled over again. A young lady, sir, has called to see you. The voice was implacable. So prepared was it to go on repeating the statement indefinitely that Jimmy resigned himself to the inevitable. He opened his eyes and blinked. Stevens, he said. Say that again. A young lady, sir, has called to see you. Oh. Jimmy strove to grasp the situation. Why? I couldn't say, sir. No, I suppose not. No. He thought it over. I suppose you couldn't. Stevens swooped down upon a tray by the bedside. I will bring you some fresh tea, sir. This is cold. You think that I ought to get up and, see the lady? Stevens made no reply, but he held his back very stiff, and Jimmy read the signs correctly. Oh, very well, he said. I suppose I'd better. She didn't give her name? No, sir. She couldn't be by any possible chance my Aunt Jemima. Could she? Because if so, I'm damned if I'm going to get up. The lady, sir, could not possibly be anyone's aunt, I should say, unless the youngest of a large family. Uh-huh, said Jimmy. Young and lovely. Is she? What kind is she? The young lady, sir, is most undoubtedly strictly comme il faut, if I may use the expression. You may use it, said Jimmy graciously. Your French pronunciation, Stevens, if I may say so, is very good. Much better than mine. I am gratified to hear it, sir. I have lately been taking a correspondence course in French. Have you really? You're a wonderful chap, Stevens. Stevens smiled in a superior fashion and left the room. Jimmy lay trying to recall the names of any young and lovely girls strictly comme il faut who might be likely to come and call upon him. Stevens re-entered with fresh tea, and as Jimmy sipped it, he felt a pleasurable curiosity. You've given her the paper and all that, I hope, Stevens, he said. I supplied her with the Morning Post and Punch, sir. A ring at the bell took him away. In a few minutes he returned. Another young lady, sir. What? Jimmy clutched his head. Another young lady. She declines to give her name, sir, but says her business is important. Jimmy stared at him. This is damned odd, Stevens. Damned odd. Look here, what time did I come home last night? Just upon 5 o'clock, sir. And was how was I? Just a little cheerful, sir. Nothing more. Inclined to sing Rule Britannia. What an extraordinary thing, said Jimmy. Rule Britannia? I cannot imagine myself in a sober state ever singing Rule Britannia. Some latent patriotism must have emerged under the stimulus of, just a couple too many. I was celebrating at the Mustard and Cress, I remember. Not nearly such an innocent spot as it sounds. Stevens. He paused. I was wondering, yes, sir. I was wondering whether under the aforementioned stimulus, I had put an advertisement in a newspaper asking for a nursery governess or something of that sort. Stevens coughed. 2 girls turning up. It looks odd. I shall eschew the Mustard and Cress in future. That a good word, Stevens. Eschew. I met it in a crossword the other day and took a fancy to it. Whilst he was talking, Jimmy was rapidly appareling himself. At the end of 10 minutes, he was ready to face his unknown guests. As he opened the door of his sitting room, the first person he saw was a dark, slim girl who was totally unknown to him. She was standing by the mantelpiece, leaning against it. Then his glance went on to the big leather-covered armchair, and his heart missed a beat. Lorraine. It was she who rose and spoke first a little nervously. You must be very surprised to see me, but I had to come. I'll explain in a minute. This is Lady Eileen Brent. Bundle. That's what I'm usually known as. You probably heard of me from Bill Eversley. Oh, rather. Of course I have, said Jimmy, endeavoring to cope with the situation. I say, do sit down and let's have a cocktail or something. But both girls declined. As a matter of fact, continued Jimmy, I'm only just out of bed. That's what Bill said, remarked Bundle. I told him I was coming round to see you, and he said you wouldn't be up. Well, I'm up now, said Jimmy encouragingly. It's about Jerry, said Lorraine. And now about Ronnie. What do you mean by and now about Ronnie? He was shot yesterday. What? Cried Jimmy. Bundle told her story for the second time. Jimmy listened like a man in a dream. Old Ronnie, shot, he murmured. What is this damned business? He sat down on the edge of a chair, thinking for a minute or two, and then spoke in a quiet, level voice. There's something I think I ought to tell you. Yes, said Bundle encouragingly. It was on the day Jerry Wade died. On the way over to break the news to you, he nodded at Lorraine. In the car, Ronnie said something to me. That is to say, he started to tell me something. There was something he wanted to tell me, and he began about it. And then he said he was bound by a promise and couldn't go on. Bound by a promise, said Lorraine thoughtfully. That's what he said. Naturally, I didn't press him after that. But he was odd, darn odd, all through. I got the impression then that he suspected, well, foul play. I thought he'd tell the doctor so. But no, not even a hint. So I thought I'd been mistaken. And afterwards, with the evidence and all, well, it seems such a very clear case. I thought my suspicions had been all bosh. But you think Ronnie's still suspected? Asked Bundle. Jimmy nodded. That's what I think now. Why? None of us have seen anything of him since. I believe he was playing a lone hand, trying to find out the truth about Jerry's death. And what's more, I believe he did find out. That's why the devil shot him. And then he tried to send word to me, but could only get out those 2 words. 7 dials, said Bundle, and shivered a little. 7 dials, said Jimmy gravely. At any rate, we've got that to go on with. Bundle, turned to Lorraine. You were just going to tell me. Oh, yes. First, about the letter. She spoke to Jimmy. Jerry left a letter. Lady Eileen, Bundle. Bundle found it. She explained the circumstances in a few words. Jimmy listened, keenly interested. This was the first he had heard of the letter. Lorraine took it from her bag and handed it to him. He read it, then looked across at her. This is where you can help us. What was it Jerry wanted you to forget? Lorraine's brows wrinkled a little in perplexity. It's so hard to remember exactly now. I opened a letter of Jerry's by mistake. It was written on cheap sort of paper, I remember, and very illiterate handwriting. It had some address in 7 dials at the head of it. I realized it wasn't for me, so I put it back in the envelope without reading it. Sure, asked Jimmy very gently. Lorraine laughed for the first time. I know what you think, and I admit that women are curious. But, you see, this didn't even look interesting. It was a kind of list of names and dates. Names and dates, said Jimmy thoughtfully. Jerry didn't seem to mind much, continued Lorraine. He laughed. He asked me if I had ever heard of the Mafia, and then said it would be queer if a society like the Mafia started in England, but that kind of secret society didn't take on much with English people. Our criminals, he said, haven't got a picturesque imagination. Jimmy pursed up his lips into a whistle. I'm beginning to see, he said. 7 Dials must be the headquarters of some secret society. As he says in his letter to you, he thought it rather a joke to start with. But evidently it wasn't a joke. He says as much. And there's something else. His anxiety that you should forget what he'd told you. There could be only one reason for that. If that society suspected that you had any knowledge of its activity, you too would be in danger. Gerald realized the peril, and he was terribly anxious for you. He stopped. Then he went on quietly. I rather fancy that we're all going to be in danger if we go on with this. If, cried Bundle indignantly. I'm talking of you too. It's different for me. I was poor old Ronnie's pal. He looked at Bundle. You've done your bit. You've delivered the message he sent me. Now, for God's sake, keep out of it. You and Lorraine. Bundle looked questioningly at the other girl. Her own mind was definitely made up, but she gave no indication of it just then. She had no wish to push Lorraine Wade into a dangerous undertaking. But Lorraine's small face was alight at once with indignation. You say that. Do you think for 1 minute I'd be contented to keep out of it? When they killed Jerry, my own dear Jerry, the best and dearest and kindest brother any girl ever had. The only person belonging to me I had in the whole world. Jimmy cleared his throat uncomfortably. Lorraine, he thought, was wonderful, simply wonderful. Look here, he said awkwardly. You mustn't say that. About being alone in the world. All that rot. You've got lots of friends. Only too glad to do what they can. See what I mean? It is possible that Lorraine did, for she suddenly blushed and to cover her confusion began to talk nervously. That's settled, she said. I'm going to help. Nobody's going to stop me. And so am I, of course, said Bundle. They both looked at Jimmy. Yes, he said slowly. Yes, quite so. They looked at him inquiringly. I was just wondering, said Jimmy, how we were going to begin. And with that, another layer of mystery unfolds. The pieces are coming together, but the truth remains just out of reach. Secrets, deception, and unexpected twists. What will happen next in the 7 Dials mystery? Stay tuned for the next part, where the plot thickens and new revelations come to light. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts. Who do you think is behind it all? The mystery continues soon. Stay curious.